The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were my jam growing up. Just seeing the old school logo with the letters made out of muscles still gets me excited. I was a huge fan of the cartoon, read a few of the original comics by Eastman and Laird, had more than a handful of action figures, and I even enjoyed the first 2 movies, and still kinda do. So as a boy, when I found there were Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles video games, you know I was stomping and demanding those. And fortunately, the NES had 4. There was the original action platformer, the arcade port simply subtitled The Arcade Game, the third game was another arcadey style beat-em-up subtitled The Manhattan Project, and then finally a fighting game. Konami bore all the responsibility for the Turtles gaming franchise back then. Let's see what's up.
Fresh from the sewer, and into your Nintendo Entertainment System comes Ultra's version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now you can take control of these heroes in a half shell as they nunchuck, swim, and bazooka blast their way through sewers and streets, ridding the world of rival robots, wretched ruffians, and the evil Foot Clan forever. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They're out of the sewers and available where Ultra games are sold.
The first Turtles game is the most different in the NES trilogy, and the one I spent the most time with growing up. It's single player, which is a big knock against it out of the gate, but the Turtles look great, and graphically the game is pretty decent for 1989. As anyone who grew up with this will tell you though, it's very tough. There are 2 viewpoints in the game. There's a top-down view, which helps you get around the city at the beginning of the game, or across the dam before you go scuba diving for bombs, or around the airport, or through Shredder's base at night. The most fun to be had here is when you get the party wagon and you can bomb around the Big Apple running over Foot Clan goons and shooting down their barricades. The other viewpoint is the side-scrolling platforming aspect where you'll spend most of your time, and in general, it controls really well. Each turtle has their own strengths and weaknesses against certain enemy types, though this isn't made known anywhere. I tend to prefer the turtles with longer ranged weapons like Leo and Donatello, but some enemies are harder for one versus the other, and the same goes for Mikey and Raphael. I found a chart online that details which enemies are susceptible to which turtle, but on the whole, Donatello seems to be the best choice given the range and his limited weaknesses. That's a really cool thing about this game though, is that you can switch between the turtles at any time by pressing start. You'll need to do this plenty for a playthrough while keeping in mind who needs health as well as who has certain special weapons. You can pick up items like scrolls, which deal a lot of damage and are great for bosses in really tough areas. You can also find shurikens and boomerangs as well. These are great for long-ranged attacks, but they're limited. The enemies are relentless. Enemies respawn immediately if you backtrack at all, so always try to move forward. There's also plenty of slowdown as well, so be prepared for slow motion through busier areas. Given that it's a platformer at heart, there are some tricky jumps to navigate. There's not really an immediate death trap in terms of falling in pits. You usually get sent back to the outside of a building or something, but you do take damage, and the onslaught of enemies you have to fight through are enough punishment for missing a jump. The second stage in the Hudson River is often regarded as being exceptionally difficult, and while it is a bit naggy in terms of hit detection, it's far from the toughest part of the game. Some of the screens at the airport are so full of turtle murdering contraptions, I found myself staring at it for a few seconds before making a move just to formulate a plan. The enemies in the cave system are oppressively constant and much stronger than other enemies, and don't get me started on the enemies inside the Technodrome. The whole final level is just mayhem. As with most tough NES games, some practice and perseverance never fails to pay off, except in this game when you get to Shredder's base. There are 5 different areas you can go, and 3 enter a cave system that will take you to either a dead end or the boss, and it's random. So you have a 33% chance of entering the right cave, and as I said before, it's brutal down there. If you're lucky and find the boss at the first stop, you might have saved yourself a continue. There are some ways to save yourself though. If you find some pizza near an entrance or exit, pop in and out and give each turtle some of that delicious life pie because health is sparse and death is imminent. There is also some optimal routing through the game that will help with each playthrough. For example, when scooting around in the party wagon, you don't need to enter every building, and when navigating the manholes at the airport, there is an optimal route that will be less grueling. Practice helps. Once a turtle is dead, you might come across a place in a later level to find and release him from captivity, but it's worth noting that these areas aren't always easy to find or on the way. In general, if you lose a turtle, consider them gone for good until your next continue. And you only get 2 continues though, and there are 6 total levels, each with an extra degree of difficulty. Do whatever you can to save your turtles. The music in the game is pretty gnarly, and a lot of that is nostalgia speaking, but that overworld theme is a bright sunny day to me. The The bosses are recognizable from the cartoons and comics, but I'm not sure about the rest of the enemies you encounter. Plenty seem to be shoved in here for the sake of having enemies. The story here is about what you would expect. Shredder kidnaps April with the intentions of brainwashing her to join his ninja Foot Clan, and the Turtles have to get her back, and also find the life transformer gun that will turn Splinter back into the man he once was. Easier said than done, dude.
Ultra's improved your favorite arcade game. First, we added 2 new levels, then packed it with bigger, stronger enemies, and a ton of extra foot soldiers. Next, we punched up the action with knockout new attack moves and crime-fighting scenes like the Ninja Castle. If that doesn't swell your shell, we made one more small adjustment. Introducing the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game, today's biggest hit, for your NES. Free personal pan pizza coupon from Pizza Hut in every box.
The sequel to the first is much different. No longer a single-player side-scrolling platformer, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 the arcade game is just that, a port of the super popular arcade game. For a port, it's pretty decent. Fewer colors and less animations, as you'd expect, but plenty to play through here. And it's of course multiplayer, so you can pal up with a buddy, each pick a turtle, and start kicking some Foot Clan A. With 2 buttons on the NES pad, moves are obviously limited. You can essentially jump, attack, and jump attack with a flying kick. If you jump and then attack almost immediately, you do a slash attack, which is a total game changer. It vanquishes each enemy in one hit, and while this game is doable without this move, once you start, you won't stop. Over the course of the game, you fight Foot Clan soldiers wearing different colors over and over. Each color represents a different type of Foot Clan foe, like a sword wielder, a sledgehammer thrower, or maybe they're just the regular purple goons. Sometimes you'll have to defend yourself from Mousers or other strange enemies like tigers that come out of walls or hunchback leaping dudes, but for the most part it's all Foot Clan ninjas. The real difficulty comes from the bosses that retain some of that arcadey difficulty in that they're almost impossible to tame without taking some damage, and they take a ridiculous amount of hits. As you wail on them, they start to blink and change color. The slash attack isn't always a good option here, because it puts you right up against the boss and in the face of danger. The flying kicks work well here, but no matter the strategy, it always seems to take a little longer than it probably should to finish off the bosses. You'll fight regular mainstays like Bebop and Rocksteady before eventually Baxter Stockman and his fly form, Tora and Shogun, and Krang before finally taking on Shredder. There are 10 total areas to fight through, which makes this a fairly girthy NES beat-em-up, especially for the time. You start with 3 lives and you get 3 continues. Each continue allows you to choose a different turtle if you wish. You also get an extra turtle for every 200 goons you beat down. And like the first game, you'll want to keep an eye out for that street pizza, though the game is pretty stingy with it. The music is great, the graphics are great, and for an arcade port, there's really not much to complain about. The game is covered in Pizza Hut ads though. Even the game's manual came with a coupon on the back. Too bad it's already expired. And you'll see Pizza Hut logos scattered everywhere. If only they put more pizza in the game. Oh well. And as for the story, yeah, Shredder kidnapped April again, so, you know, go save her and stuff. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, The Manhattan Project, is yet another arcade-style side-scrolling beat-em-up. It is very similar to the previous game, except the view is a little zoomed out here. There is no more slash attack. Instead, if you press A and B together, you'll do a super attack that subtracts your health, unless you're near dead, so you have to use it wisely. Jump and attack and flying kicks are all still here, but you can use the D-pad to influence your attack. If you hold down and attack, you'll toss enemies over your head, which does more damage than an ordinary attack. It's similar to the slash attack in the second game, except it's a little slower to execute. The premise to this one is only slightly different. The Turtles are on vacation down in Key West, Florida. When watching an April O'Neil news report, her broadcast is hijacked and she's abducted. Go figure. Everything goes wrong when the Turtles are away, so the Turtles have to make their way back to Manhattan, which Shredder now has floating over the rest of New York City. The third game is a direct sequel to the second, and does not have a preceding arcade version. However, some set pieces in this game are reminiscent to the arcade game Turtles in Time, which was ported to the Super Nintendo, and later to the Genesis as Hyperstone Heist. So while made for the NES, it's not entirely unique to it. Out the gate, you can select to play by yourself or with a friend in modes A or B. Mode A introduces friendly fire, where you can inflict damage on your partner as you play, and Mode B turns that off, thank God. Per usual, you can select any turtle to play as so long as your partner hasn't already chosen them, and in this one you don't have to wait for a continue to switch turtles. Each time you die, you can cycle through the available turtles and pick a new one. It doesn't seem like there's a grand difference between any two turtles, but once again it seems as though Leo and Don have the best range on their attacks, so they're usually the ones I go with. The only real difference is in their super attack animations, but they all do about the same thing. There are 7 different areas you'll venture through in the game. You'll start in Fort Slaughterdale. Yes, that's what it's called. Here you're marching down the boardwalk fighting bad dudes, then you hop on your jet-powered surfboards and ride the waves. Then you get to New York and fight while the Brooklyn Bridge is literally falling down, before eventually going into the sewers, then to the Technodrome, before hopping an elevator on the way to Krang's spaceship. The set pieces are pretty familiar if you're a Turtles fan, and the game riffs heavily on the cartoon's influence of the time. It's a great follow-up to the more popular and well-known Turtles 2 the arcade game, and Manhattan Project is becoming more and more difficult to track down. If you enjoyed the second one, the third one is basically just as good in my opinion. Great graphics and animations, fun cutscenes, a nice change of scenery with the beach themes, and Konami's influence over the music is great too. A fighting game featuring the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Sign me up, 1994. Bad news though, it is not great. At all. While the idea of picking your favorite turtle in a head-to-head fighting game against Shredder or some familiar Foot Clan bosses sounds totally rad, dude, all you get are 4 turtles, Casey, Hothead, and Shredder. Yeah, Hothead, not Bebop, Rocksteady, Toka, Razor, Baxter Stockman. Hothead. The Genesis version offers a few others, including April and Syphilis? The Super Nintendo version is by far the best. It has some offbeat characters like Aska, War, Wingnut, and Armagon, but the story mode actually presents somewhat of a narrative. Not that a fighting game story mode needs something like that, but it just shows how much more effort was put into the Super Nintendo version. The story mode on the NES version is just match after match with really no exposition. Overall, the NES and Genesis versions are stiflingly hard. Even if you drop the difficulty, you'll have a hard time getting victories over the CPU. I'm not a fighting game extraordinaire by any means, mind you, and given the NES version was a later release on the system, coming in 1994, and a few months after its Super Nintendo and Genesis counterparts, graphically it doesn't have a ton going for it. It already has the disadvantage of trying to be a fighting game in an era when Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat were dominating in arcades and on 16-bit systems. With only 2 buttons, limited character and stage selection, and brutal difficulty, the NES version of Tournament Fighters is worthy of a skip for sure. The Genesis version isn't much better, really, but it is more akin to Mortal Kombat with its hellish and lifeless environs, while the Super Nintendo version feels almost like it was aiming for a Street Fighter feel, with brighter outdoor environs on Earth, and with notable characters cheering on in the background, whether it be foot soldiers or Rocksteady. It's a neat touch. In general, I don't find Tournament Fighters to be very deep or fun, especially on the NES. It's unfortunate, but not entirely unexpected. Of the 4 Ninja Turtle games on the NES, you'll have the most success and fun with a friend in Turtles 2 the arcade game and Manhattan Project. I have a soft spot for the original. As an only child, I don't mind the solo adventure of the first if only it weren't so difficult, but it's still a solid game through and through. If you want to play Tournament Fighters, get it on the Super Nintendo. As you'd expect, there are plenty more Turtles games from back in the day. In addition to the ones we discussed today, there were 3 on the Game Boy: Fall of the Foot Clan, Back from the Sewers, and Radical Rescue. All three are pretty decent side-scrolling platformers. The Super Nintendo of course had Turtles 4, Turtles in Time, technically the next game in Konami's series, and the Genesis had Hyperstone Heist. The two are very similar experiences, but different enough to make trying both worth it. Well, that does it for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games on the NES. Cowabunga, dude! And thanks for watching.